Hi everyone, welcome back to our next video for mugs and cups. Today I'm going to show you how to put handles onto your cups to essentially make them a mug. And today is where the essential question is really going to kick in, and that is, how does form relate to communication with the viewer or the user? At this point, when you've made your cup, preferably it'll feel good in your hands. When we start thinking about adding a handle to a mug, that's where it's really going to come into play of, does someone want to use our product that we've made? So I have a couple examples here, and I'm going to demonstrate how to make a handle in a moment. And the first thing we want to think about is personal preference. Some people really like to have a small one-finger mug, such as this piece made by Pete Scherzer. It is just a simple little coil handle, which I'm going to show you how to do pretty soon. And he adds an extra little piece right down here, mostly just to catch the glaze drip. It looks nice in there. But that's a one-finger handle that works pretty well on a mug. Another piece right here, and this has a couple little add-ons also. This is, for my size of a hand, a two-fingered mug, and this is where my preference really kicks in. I like having at least 2 fingers in most mugs, sometimes 3, such as this piece made by Kippo Krungli. 3 fingers will fit nicely in there. This is also a very nice wide handle. If you compare that with the very thin Pete Scherzer handle, 2 completely different functions, the way those work and how they feel with your hand. So it'll take a little time, but you'll start to figure out what works best for you. And a handle that I often get requested, but I personally don't enjoy using, is a full 4-finger Stein type handle. This one also has a couple little filials added onto there, but it also works with 3 fingers because of this extra little added piece right down there. So when you start thinking about your mug, you're going to think about what works for you. Another consideration to think about is, do I have room for a big Stein type handle if my mug is only 2 to 3 inches tall? I have my piece here that I made last week, and as I mentioned before, with a mug you should not have to trim the bottom up. Bare minimum what you should do is to wet your fingers and round off this bottom edge. You want to make sure that this is not sharp, because when you take this home and put this on your table, if it is sharp, it will end up scratching through the wood or the laminate that you have on your table, and we don't want that at all. If you do have a very thick bottom on yours and it does need trimming, you could of course make a small clay arrow, make your center little circles for your target, and then trim it just like you would a cup. Preferably, I would like my potters to learn how to start throwing nice and thin so that you can work a little bit quicker, not have to trim, and thus you have much more time for making pots on the wheel, which is the fun stuff. And wedging, don't forget that. We love wedging. So I've pre-made a little handle right here. I made this about 10 minutes ago, and it's going to be drying. The reason for that is because when you first pull a handle, which I'm going to do here in a moment, is that it's going to be very, very wet, thus very flimsy. We don't want that. So I pulled one ahead of time, and I'll set that aside. Now we're going to move on to the pulling of a handle. This is what professional potters do in order to make a nice looking, smooth handle that people are going to want to come back to again and again. So I've got my bucket of water. If you decide to do this at the wheel, very, very important step here, turn your wheel off. Because if I accidentally step on my pedal, or most likely if the person next to me accidentally steps on the pedal, this is going to vibrate for a moment and then explode everywhere, getting you wet. Got my bucket of water. I also have a ball of clay. This is about a baseball size. Usually what I recommend for beginners, when you pull handles, for every mug you have, make 2 handles. Because sure enough, something's going to go wrong and one of them might not work. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do this. Starting with a ball of clay, I tap it between my hands using the palm, and the hands are perfectly made for working with clay. And as I start hitting this, it's going to start coming down like a funnel cloud. It's going to start tapering down here. And once I have the beginning of that little taper, which is going to look like an upside down teardrop shape, I'm going to hold it by the thick part, and I'm going to start extending and pulling this clay down into a very thin, what most potters call either a ribbon or a tongue handle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my hand completely wet, and I'm going to wet this clay as well, the whole bottom part that I'm going to be pulling on here. And I'm going to make an OK sign with my hand. In doing that, I'm going to lightly, lightly pull down. And as I do this, my left hand is going to start rotating. Very slowly, unwinding and winding back so that I'm pulling down in 360 degrees around this handle. As soon as I feel any friction at all, the least little bit of friction, I'm getting more water and pulling. Now if you notice, I probably pulled this about 50 times, but in fact it really hasn't changed much at all. It's because I don't want to stretch the clay. I'm just lightly coaxing it to move, but without pulling on it. I should have zero friction. And pretty soon, once I've started wetting this clay down enough, the clay is actually going to start stretching down and looking more like a long funnel cloud or a little spike coming off there. Once I get that about the thickness of my finger, here's where I'm going to stop rotating my hand 360 degrees, and I'm only going to pull on two sides. One side, other side. That's going to give me a flat ribbon type handle. So I hold this back again. I'm going to pull maybe 10 times. I'm going to turn it 360 degrees, and I'm going to pull from the other side. Again, constant water, back and forth. And as a beginner, you probably do have preferences for what your handle looks like. However, as a beginner, you probably won't have a whole lot of control on just how that handle looks at first. A lot of potters will say you need to pull a good 100, 200, 300 handles before you really start getting good at it. For now, we're just trying to get a handle to work. So I'm shooting for nice and thin, preferably consistent all the way throughout, but I want that thicker part up here. That part's going to be important. Once I've got this pulled, at least as long as my finger, I'm going to tear this off much thicker than what I need. I know I probably need this much. I'm going to cut it off way up here, just by tearing. And I'm going to set this little piece aside to dry for a bit. Ideally, not in a C shape, but instead, just like we learned back in our intro classes, in more of a half a heart shape. It should have that curve at the top and then come down to a point, half of a heart shape. While that is set aside, I've now got my mug. It's been 10 minutes later. You've went ahead and wedged a few more pieces of clay, got ready for your next day of throwing, and now it is time to attach that handle. What I'm first going to do is decide where I want that handle to be. Now I could put the handle way down here at the bottom. That's an option. However, it's probably not going to function very well. I could put it right up on the very top and have that come down. It's not a problem. A lot of times potters like to have their pots, or their handles, start where there are changes in direction. So a change in direction would be right here at this curve and right here on this more convex curve. So I'm going to choose to put my handle from this curve down to there. That will also give me, because of this concave part here, a little extra room for my fingers to fit in between there. If I put the handle right here, I'm not going to have much room. So I choose where I'm going to make that mark on the mug. And I'm only going to worry about the top spot right now. I'm not going to worry about where it ends. We just need to know where it's going to begin. And I'm going to score that as usual. And I'm going to add a little bit of slip. You can use water here, but I always prefer to use a little bit of slip. I feel that works much better. And as I said before, when we cut this off, when we tore it off the ball of clay, we tore it off a little bit higher than what we wanted. That's because when I tore it off, I kind of made a messy edge. I want a nice clean edge for when I cut this. So I'm going to cut it off to a little more manageable space. And if you remember back from intro, I'm going to do a technique called hold and scold. I'm going to hold it just shy of the very top rim, and just like being scolded, I'm going to lightly fatten that top part up. What that does is it gives me a little extra thickness up at the top that creates a little more grip strength and make your mug a little more likely to survive with its handle. Go again and score a tiny bit more. Make sure it has a lot of slip on it, especially if your mug is already pretty dry. And I'm going to attach this onto here. Lightly wiggling it on. And once it's attached, that's where I'm going to just start lightly pressing this down and blending it in. So it makes it look as though that handle just grew right out of the side of the mug. Remember, one of the things that people really love about pottery is that they can't really tell how we did it. They have no idea how we start with a little lump of clay and make something beautiful and functional out of it. So the more that we can hide our process, as a beginner especially, sometimes later you might decide you really want to show certain parts of your process. But as a beginner, it's really nice to make people wonder just how you did something so beautiful. So I have the bottom or the top part attached, and now I'm going to attach the bottom part. I have enough to attach it all the way down to the bottom, so here's where I can start playing with the what ifs. What if I attach it down here? What if I lifted it up and I attach it up here? How is that going to function in my hand? What do I need to do if I don't like the shape of it here, but I really like it here? Do I raise this up? Should I press more here? You have all sorts of different options. And one option is always, it's a little too long. I'm going to cut some of that off. That's why I always recommend making our handles a little bit bigger than what we need. So if I'm going to attach it here, I'm going to make a little mark with my pencil or my knife or a needle tool, whatever works for you, and put that off to the side. I'm going to score this. Add a little more slip right down here at the base where it attaches. And instead of, as I mentioned before, not attaching it like a C shape, where it's going to have very, very little grip strength. It's like a rock climber grabbing onto a little bitty tiny nub. We want to have much more of a strong grip. So I'm going to point it down in that half a heart shape. I'm going to make sure it's straight up and down. I've attached a lot of handles that look like this and a lot that look like that. Get it right in the middle, and I'm just going to attach it there nice and lightly. Some potters like to give one good thumbprint to squish that on. Other potters like to make a couple little gestures. It's completely up to you. The last step after I put this on is I'm going to go through and just lift this up so that it takes on, again, that half a heart shape. We want that to really, really give it a little bit of lift at the top so our fingers are setting nice and high on the mug. You can also at that point, when it's all finished, a great tool that I recommend, and we have plenty of them here, is a simple makeup sponge. These are going to smooth your clay out a little bit better than a regular yellow sponge because there's no grain to these. And that grain allows you to keep your mug nice and smooth without making the texture rougher from picking up the moisture from the pot. Once you've made your handle, you're going to want to let it dry for a night. If you make a handle which is nice and wet and we leave it set out overnight, this is sort of like your fingers on a cold day. They're hanging out in space. There's not a lot of volume to surface area, so they're going to dry very, very quickly, just like your fingers get cold outside. So you're going to want to wrap this up for at least one more night. That's going to let the moisture level homogenize. And the next day, you're going to unwrap it. As usual, use a pen or a pencil. Sign your work. You should always sign our work. And it's now ready for the kiln. Have fun, guys.